Thank you. It's great to be here. As the host said, my talk will be DeFi infrastructure and tooling for the Polkadot ecosystem. The plan is it's going to be an introduction to DeFi and tooling for Polkadot and new builders. Quick little warning. This is open for everyone. You don't need any technical experience to really know what's going on here. And I've really tried to make it quite fun and enjoyable because I know we've had a long kind of few days of talks and over 60 plus talks. The goal for this one is to kind of illuminate the tooling and demonstrate a different kind of perspective about how you can think about tooling. So firstly, welcome. It's great to be here, especially for everyone watching online. I know that we have a bit of a crowd here. Thanks for coming to watch. But I know that the people who are watching back at home or watching on YouTube, thanks a lot for checking it out. And if you do want to get any more information, I have a bunch of stuff on my YouTube channel as well. So I've broken this talk down into about 4 kind of different topics. The first topic is just a bit about me, so you can learn a little bit about my experience, what I've done in the Polkadot ecosystem, what I've done before kind of Polkadot. The second part is a bit of a surprise. I don't want to spoil it yet. It should be pretty fun, but yeah, so we'll get that. We'll do a little bit of a .DeFi where we'll have a look at a few of the projects. I know that earlier today, Nico from Velocity actually spoke quite a lot about DeFi, so I won't go too deep into that. And if there's any questions at the end, I might go through it. All kind of depends on time. So firstly, about me. I'm a Web3 researcher. I previously have worked within the ecosystem. I'm definitely a DeFi degen and a Polkadot ecosystem agent.
Your PhD is on?
My PhD is on business information systems, and I cover fintech entrepreneurial ecosystems about like how small businesses emerge and how they kind of translate into medium-sized businesses. I might go a bit over that at the end if you like, yeah. So my experience, I previously worked at Oak Network, the parachain, for over 2 years as the head of research and education. If you're not sure about what Oak Network is, it's an automation parachain. We have a parachain on Kusama and on Polkadot as well. Some of my key achievements, we launched the cross-chain XCM use cases, where we automatically compound liquidity pool rewards for multiple dexes. I've also been the Polkadot Hackathon judge and mentor for the European, Asian, North American editions, keynote speaker at multiple conferences, and we also launched the first recurring payment feature at Oak Network. Before working in crypto, though, my background is actually in gaming and esports. So hopefully we have some people that are slightly interested in gaming, either here or watching at home, because that's going to be a pretty significant kind of thing that's popping up in this talk. So. Before I worked in Web3, I actually worked on this game called Pixel Starships. It has 20+ million downloads, 10+ million users. So a lot of the kind of things that I'll be touching on are based on these types of games and stuff like that. So yeah, you'll learn that coming up. Before that, I worked at Riot Games as an esports handler. If you guys ever played League of Legends, you might know that. So I have pretty good experience working on some really innovative kind of projects, and that translates from Web3 to traditional games. When I was young, I created one of the top World of Warcraft guilds in Australia, so more gaming experience. I promise, though, this will make sense slightly in the future. So hopefully some people here played World of Warcraft as well. Nowadays, though, I don't really get that much time to play games, but I do speedrun games on Twitch a little bit. I actually have the world record in this old Nintendo 64 game called Snowboard Kids. There you can see there's my time on there. It's pretty awesome, so if you ever want to check out my Twitch, you can check that out as well. But there's one more game that was really important to me kind of like in my development when I was a kid, and that's where we're going to start. And that game is called RuneScape. Has anyone here played RuneScape potentially? Oh yeah, there we go. We got some hands. There's not too many people in the crowd, but I'm glad that you guys have played RuneScape because that's going to make all this make a lot more sense. And yeah, so that's when we get to our second part 2, and that's the surprise. And it's going to be the similarities between RuneScape economics and Polkadot DeFi and lessons we can learn. I know it's a bit weird, but it should make sense like as we go forward. So story time. How I learned about finance and economics from RuneScape. Bit of a weird way to do it, but I think there's probably quite a few people at this conference that also learned their kind of basis of understanding of economics and finance from playing computer games. So I started playing RuneScape when I was about 12. I'm 32 now, so that's 20 years ago. And to make gold in the game, I had a bit of an interesting strategy. I would pick flax within the game, and then I would spin the flax into bowstrings, and then I would sell the bowstrings to fletchers. I did this for at least 6 months. And in that period, I made so much money that I bought this coveted Purple Party Hat. If you're not sure what a purple party hat is, you'll learn about it in the future. But when I used to play that game, it was quite rugged. And so here's a screenshot. This is what it used to be like to try to buy something. You would just sit in a trade area, and people would just spam the chat asking for people trying to buy stuff. It was completely like unregulated. You'd have like, it was impossible to find anything, and it was really like an introductory to markets. So here's some fun facts about purple party hats, though. When I bought them, my one cost 25 million gold pieces. Nowadays, they cost 42.2 billion gold, which is this much of a percentage increase. And the reason that they're worth so much is because in some ways they represent like the first kind of NFTs, whereas the game introduced like a limited run of items, purple party hats and different color party hats, which you could obtain, and then they never released them again. So they had a completely locked supply, and obviously over time, when they were first released, they were worth very little gold, but nowadays they're worth billions of gold, which you could probably sell for hundreds of thousands of real-life dollars. And so they really demonstrate this like limited supply, NFT kind of mixture of that people really want to have things that have limited availability. And yeah, so that's how I sold my bowstrings. And eventually I sold so many bowstrings that I wouldn't have to craft bowstrings anymore. And what I started doing was I liquidated all my items, and I would buy bowstrings off new people who were making bowstrings, and then I would sell them to already customers that already knew that wanted them. And this is, again, a very similar kind of like aspect to how financial markets really work. But at the time, I had no idea that this is really what I was doing. And yeah, so that's kind of how it goes through. So what does this all have to do with Polkadot DeFi, right? Like, I get it that it's kind of difficult because there's like these two things, but when you bring them together, you'll start to see that there's some serious similarities between the two. And Polkadot is so innovative and so new, even though we have different DeFi ecosystems and we have different blockchains, it's still very, very unique. So the lessons that we can kind of learn from here can kind of be applied onto like other projects. So the main reason is it's all about tools and infrastructure. The tools and infrastructure is really what brings the ecosystem together so that we can take in multiple users. If we only have like really back-end structures working, then we alienate ourselves from having like introducing to much more users. And I think that's something that's really quite important. So, and this is a good demonstration, is that to have this interoperability kind of landscape that Polkadot is kind of known for, it's more than just open channels. It's easy to open a HRMP channel between like A-Star and Manta or whatever, but to have like that true cohesion between two projects, there's a lot more that really goes into that. And while some of those can be like technical tools, some of those are simple tools like who handles the support cases for these problems if you have an issue moving assets between two parachains. So looking at the understanding of what tools you really need to have and what infrastructure is important is really dependent on having like a top-down view where you're looking at the whole thing from quite far away. So here's an example, like moving assets across chains and platforms. When you want to move something from Asset Hub, there's so many decisions to make and so many things that can kind of go wrong that if you don't have this high level of understanding, it can be really alienating. So for example, I've had a look here. You can go through, from the Asset Hub, you can go to substrate chains, EVM chains, the relay chain, Kusama, you can use a bridge, you can use a dApp. Then you also have to decide if it's going to be on an EVM wallet, a substrate wallet, hardware wallet. Then you've got all this kind of like ways that your assets can go without any understanding. If it's your first time coming to the ecosystem, it can be really difficult to understand what's important, and that can be really alienating. So here's an example from RuneScape, because RuneScape had a very similar problem where it's impossible to know where to go and what you should be doing and where you can go. And RuneScape had to solve that in its own type of way, and I'm hopeful that we can kind of learn a similar lesson from the game and apply it to kind of Polkadot. And that's from mapping. So as you see, this is the old RuneScape map. I've replaced with a lot of the events with different parachains, and I think it looks quite cool. And I got a lot of likes on Twitter about it, so I had to put it in the slides, you know. So how did RuneScape fix their travel and an issue of moving things and having people understand where they can and can't move things? They introduced something called the Spirit Tree. The Spirit Tree allows you to move between places through different Spirit Trees. But what is really important about the Spirit Trees is it tells you very clearly what you can and what you can't do, and then what you need to have done to be able to get to that new place, which is something that in our current state in Polkadot is quite difficult. For example, if you want to bridge to, if you want to buy Manta tokens right now, you're going to have a MetaMask wallet, head to Stellar Swap, and then purchase through there. But you can't even connect that back to the relay chain without using like a cross-chain swap. So if you're just only interested in DOT and you see Manta and you want to kind of get involved in it, the difficulty in getting there is really quite difficult. It's quite challenging, and it's not because the underlying infrastructure is missing, but because the way it's demonstrated and displayed to you is like quite difficult to find. So that's something that I think we can learn a lesson from the spirit trees, is by making it very clear of like what's possible to be moved between where is something that can be really beneficial. So here's my example that Polkadot needs its own spirit trees. So that if you can move between all of these things, which is currently possible, but understanding of how to do it for new users is, I think, something that will really expand the ecosystem. So I'm really hopeful that we'll get there in the future. So what other tools and infrastructure do we need? I think there's a huge demand for tooling and infrastructure right now. We have some really good projects within the ecosystem, but as we expand and get more like unique user cases, I think this is going to be something that really kind of grows. And we're starting to see that within the ecosystem with new projects coming through from the decentralized futures and stuff. Tooling and infrastructure is something that's only consistently growing. So to find out what is also missing, I spoke to the DeFi guy on Twitter. You guys might know him. He's quite active in the Polkadot ecosystem. And I kind of wanted to find out what the missing puzzle piece was, or something that, from his perspective, as someone who's extremely active within Polkadot DeFi, like what do we really want? And his example is analytics. And I think this is a really good place to start, is that analytics are incredibly important for anyone that wants to get involved in DeFi. And having them be slightly inaccurate creates a huge difficulty within the ecosystem, where you don't really know what you're looking at, and if that's not clear, it makes it impossible to really trade to a level that you really want to be doing. So I think that improving the analytics to be more comprehensive across all the parachains, across the Kusama, across Polkadot, across everywhere, is a huge beneficial thing that we can look for in the future. And I'm hopeful to see more analytic kind of things coming in the future. Here's a good example of that. If you look up Polkadot and parachains on DeFi Llama, you get some good data. However, this is really missing some significant points in there. Like, for example, there's no centrifuge here, and there's a lot of the liquidity has kind of been misshapen. So without that, that really prevents new people from coming into the ecosystem, because you have to have a high-level understanding of what's going on in Polkadot to be able to look at this and realize that this is pretty inaccurate. So this really limits how many people that we have coming in, because if you want to use DeFi Llama and you want to bridge into Polkadot, this is exactly what you think is going to be like, but it's not really that accurate. So I'm hopeful that we can kind of improve that in the future and really get a good demonstration of the analytics and where all the liquidity is locked right now. And like I was saying before, is that inaccurate analytics significantly weakens our DeFi ecosystem. So I'm hopeful that we can kind of get there in the future and have much better analytics, because I think that will really strengthen our position within the overall kind of crypto market. But we do have some great projects, though, and some great tooling and infrastructure. Obviously, subquery. I'm a huge fan of subquery, and I know that we had Marta here yesterday talking about what's possible through subquery, and obviously Subsquid as well. Their ability to kind of demonstrate the queryable data is, I think, really, really useful. And then we also have the governance tools like Poker Assembly, Subsquare. I think together these work really well in highlighting what's possible and what's not so possible in Polkadot, but they're still very complex tools which are alienating for new users. So if you're a new user, your ability to kind of run queries on subqueries is going to be relatively low. So you really need to consider it from a greater lens about what's kind of possible. So, and then obviously we have Velocity Labs. I think Nico spoke earlier just before lunch, and I know that they have plans to make some really good tools, and I'm really looking forward to kind of what they have going forward. If you want to learn more about any of those projects, feel free to check them out. I've linked their Twitters here. And that's the main thing that I really wanted to cover. But I'm happy to jump more into my PhD if you like. You asked a question. So I was actually talking to the host earlier today. My PhD covers fintech entrepreneurial ecosystems, and it's kind of like the differences between small businesses and large businesses, especially focused on the mechanisms through how small businesses can kind of translate into other medium or large businesses. So for an example, the structure of most businesses is relatively similar, but small businesses have an option instead of trying to be profit-driven, they can be acquisition-driven. So instead of like their end goal to be making as much money as possible, their goal can just be simply to kind of get bought out. So that shapes how the businesses are kind of structured. Instead of having to have like operational staffs that are focusing on this, you can kind of ignore a lot of that stuff. So my PhD kind of maps those different mechanisms that shape how different businesses are kind of structured. So that's to answer your question. But yeah, that's about it. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to ask anything. I'm happy to go over anything. But yeah.
Hi. First of all, I want to say you have a very impressive track record with work experience and gaming.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Where credit is due.
Yep.
And your presentation was one of the best one I might have seen in my life, actually. So really
the
good
slides?
job on that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I am good at slides. I obviously has been a doctorate researcher. I've done a lot of presentations, so having good slides is a really good way to kind of cover if the content's not that great. So yeah, no, much appreciated.
Yeah, it was very engaging.
Thank you.
Well done. So my question is, you connected your whole gaming experience from before, from your childhood, with the Polkadot DeFi ecosystem. So you've connected the dots,
yep.
pun intended.
Yeah.
My question is, for you, was that like a eureka moment? Like you woke up one day and you said, "Oh my, this makes perfect sense," or was it like continuous, gradually working towards completing the puzzle for this?
That's a great question. So it felt like a eureka moment, but when I look back on it, it was that gradual type of thing where I was learning elements from different kind of aspects. I just wanted to obtain cool items in the game, right? But to do that, I had to kind of fundamentally learn the frameworks for financial markets. And I didn't realize that I knew that until I started kind of working in finance. And then I'd be like explaining things to people. I'd be like, oh no, but this works like this. Like this is what slippage is. This is how these kind of functions are created. So I think the best thing about it though is that the game economies are very raw. They're not like the same as a traditional like market maker economy or like Fortune 500 company finance, but that has a similarity to blockchain finance, where it's the people involved are kind of similar, highly passionate, lots of dangerous behavior as well. If you've played RuneScape, you know that scams are extremely high. And to handle those types of games, you have to implement strategies for how you're going to handle people trying to steal your money all the time. And those types of lessons translate really, really well into blockchain. And that's why I think that there'd be a huge overlap of the people that currently refer to themselves as DeFi degens that actually played those types of games back in the day. So trying to understand the perspective that helped teach these people and apply that into what we're doing now, I think is the key takeaway from my talk, is that it doesn't have to emulate big finance. We can copy what we've all learned in these games to make the systems kind of better. So hope that answers your question a little bit.
Very cool, thank you.
Yeah. All right, I'll call it that one. Thanks so much, guys.